Rene Descartes was a philosopher, which, it could be argued, is the world's most useless job. Does it get anything done? If they were all sacked, would anybody miss them?
Soul, not dog!
Whatever the answer, Descartes' fame seems to have survived longer than most.
Dad.
Maybe because he was aware that what any philosopher needs is a good catchphrase. In his case, I think, therefore I am. Though you can't help thinking, is that it? Bit obvious, isn't it? My granddad used to go, long as you got your health, that's the main thing. Does that make him a philosopher? But there was more to Descartes than that. In ascending order of importance, he never got up before midday. He laid the basis for modern thinking on any subject for the next 400 years, and he worked out most of his theories while sitting in an oven. To work out his ideas, he found it essential to spend most of his life in Holland, though he was born in the French town of La Haye in 1596 into the lower ranks of the nobility. His mother died when he was a year old and his father remarried when he was 3. Then he went to a school run by Jesuit priests, and it was already clear he was quite unusual. He had a constant cough and managed to convince the authorities he was so ill he couldn't possibly get out of bed before 11. Which sounds like a modern student attitude. Like when you meet one and they say, oh, I'm like really stressed because I've got to like hand in this 5,000-word essay like tomorrow morning, I haven't even started yet. Then you go, blimey, that's a bit rough. When did they give you that to do? And they go, oh, a year ago in November. But Descartes' education came at a time when thinking wasn't a popular pastime. Circulars were sent round the universities, instructing teachers what to say on various subjects. For example, one said that angels definitely moved, which some of the clergy disputed. So then another regulation stated,
let all professors conform to these prescriptions. Let them say nothing against, either in public or in private.
What a comment on the ideas of the church at the time, that the sensible faction is the one going, oh, don't be so ridiculous. Angels are quite happy staying where they are. At one point, Parliament passed a law forbidding anybody to attack Aristotle's ideas. And while Aristotle was a genius for his time, his ideas of, for example, why things move don't really encourage a modern scientific approach. If you drop a stone, he said, it falls because it has falling qualities. Whereas a substance like helium rises because it has rising qualities. According to the Church and to Aristotle, everything has a natural position and state in the universe, and it can move away from that, but it will quickly try to get back to that position or state. For example, Jamie Oliver, for a moment went off and did something half-decent with his school dinners thing, but then quickly went back to doing his Sainsbury's adverts, reverting straight to his natural level of shitness.
So I got my beer, got my mascarpone cheese, and just killing my time because I'm always a bit premature, and look forward to seeing the ladies, mate.
But the church applied this to everything. It was a belief that everything in the universe obeyed a fixed set of laws created by God, and to inquire any further was almost an affront to God's wisdom. Many of the church's rules sprang from the idea that knowledge was sinful, as if the stupider you are, the more pleased God is. Which must mean that the inner sanctum of heaven is full of Jodie Marsh and Blazing Squad and Tara Palmer Tompkinson going, oh, I can't get a note out of this harp, and I've been blowing in it all day long. Take a bite, please, mate.
Take the red one, Mr. Steele.
Thank you, Vep. From the 15th century onwards, the church had to contend with discoveries that undermined their view. It was revealed that the earth was round, that it wasn't at the centre of the universe, and that it didn't travel in perfect circles, as the clergy had insisted. So some philosophers tried to find a way of understanding the universe that could encompass proof and evidence rather than just faith. Understandably, this could be dangerous. A philosopher called Rene was prosecuted for trying to explain how the miracles worked. To the church, he must have seemed like one of these magicians who tells an audience how the things with all the rings works and gets thrown out of the magic circle. Faith, not proof, was what was supposed to drive belief in the resurrection or the virgin birth or Moses' part in the Red Sea. Although, to be accurate, it was God who parted the Red Sea. Moses was only God's Debbie McGee. Nonetheless, Descartes pledged to fulfil the role and devise a philosophy for the new times. Thanks very much, mate. That's lovely.
No problem, Mr. Steele.
He decided he could pursue this aim best if left isolated, guaranteed free from all interruptions. In particular, he said, his clearest thoughts would come while he was sat in an oven. It's not known at what precise temperature he preferred the oven, or even if there were different temperatures for different subjects. To follow this calling, he needed a job that would allow him to spend all day working out sums. So he joined the Dutch army. While in the army, he developed sympathy for a secret society called the Rosicrucians, who believed a glorious future lay ahead when science would dominate human thought for the benefit of all humankind. Unfortunately, they also believed they'd be able to make themselves invisible, and they formed an invisible college, which still stands on this very site, right here. But then something happened that must have influenced Descartes. The French started a war against Protestant Europe. Whole cities were destroyed, and anyone who challenged Catholic beliefs was threatened. This must be why Descartes decided to live and work in Holland, the area of Europe in which Protestantism was most firmly established. The French army massacred Protestants and thousands fled to Holland as refugees. Horrified by the slaughter of Protestants, Descartes joined the refugees in Holland, which was impressive for a Catholic. But he also loved the isolation and even had all his mail sent to a friend. And he told him,
Lie to everyone about where I live.
But though he was isolated, he was also surrounded by human activity. He went to Amsterdam docks to ask the sailors questions that would help his theories.
Ever doubt your existence, skinny boy? Hey, sailor boy, ever have any doubts?
And from his letters, he seems to have known hundreds of people. And like most people in Holland at the time, smoked tobacco that was cut with dope. So he's a dopehead, he never gets up before 11 and he asks questions like, how do we know we're really here? At this point, this could be a lecture about the bloke who used to live with me in a squat, who once smoked my rubber plant. But although his behaviour was eccentric, he was never just a cliched philosopher sitting in a field all day, thinking. He lived in places like this one, in the middle of Amsterdam, which they commemorated with a slightly wonky stone. And he started seeing a Dutch maid, Helena, and they lived together and had a daughter, Francine. At Francine's baptism, Descartes announced himself as the illegitimate girl's father. So in his personal life, he wasn't reverential to the ideas of the church either. In fact, at the time, it was often thought that philosophers shouldn't have sex at all. One, Clézelier, said that Descartes' child was the result of
the mistake he had made one time in his life against the honour of his celibacy.
See, this is the thinking at the heart of the Catholic Church, that celibacy is pure and sex is dirty and unnatural. They should be made to test this out. Get a newborn baby, keep it in isolation with no outside influences as it was brought up, and see what came to it first, transubstantiation or tossing itself off. But Descartes' family fell apart. His daughter Francine died when she was 5, which left him devastated. And strangely, he never wrote another mention of Helena again either, and she disappeared from all public records. Now, completely on his own, he began work on what would become known as the Meditations. He set about constructing a theory of the universe in which, instead of beginning with blind faith, he would insist on doubt. So he started by writing down everything that he could believe with absolute certainty. In Meditations, he began with maths because philosophy held numbers in high esteem as the only things that were perfect. But, he said,
the weakness of the human memory and the carelessness to which we are prone threatens this exact science.
Sometimes, he said, we add numbers up wrong. And if we add them up wrong once, how can we be absolutely certain that we don't add them up wrong every time?
Therefore, how can you be sure
200?
that is 200? Maybe that is 4 million, I don't know.
4 million? You can only have 501 in the whole game.
And once it's possible to make one mistake, then like a computer virus, that affects every calculation. But to the philosophical world, this was all shocking. Maths was supposed to be perfect. You couldn't doubt it. And with similar logic, about believing people, he said,
It is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once.
I have absolutely no doubt at all that we will find evidence of weapons of mass destruction programs. No doubt at all.
Then he turned to the senses.
Whatever I have accepted up till now as most true, I have acquired from or through the senses. But sometimes the senses deceive.
Look out of a window, he said, and you might see people walking. Except that from a distance, what you actually see is lots of hats and coats shuffling along, and in our brain we tell ourselves that this must be people. So we don't necessarily believe our senses. So there's no guarantee from our senses that we can know the exact nature of anything. Now, at this point, there is a legitimate philosophical objection that can be made, which is, oh, shut your twaddle and get a proper bloody job. 8 hours on a building site dragging sacks of concrete about will sort all that out, you lazy French dopehead. See what happens if the foreman tells you to move some wood and you go, but how can we be certain what is wood? Except that when you think about it for a minute, it sort of is right. We see a shadow out of the corner of our eye, we may think it's a spider, we hear a car backfiring, we think it's a gunshot, so we can't rely on our senses. Descartes was trying to work out how we can be certain that anything exists at all. So all we can be sure of is that we are here. Except we could be dreaming. We've all had vivid dreams that are so lucid you wake up and think things like, oh, I better go and feed that giraffe that we bought. And then he said there could be a malicious demon that makes us think that all this stuff is happening when it isn't. Now, you might think that's a peculiar thing for a malicious demon to waste his time on, making us have thoughts like, Paperboy was early this morning and, legally, prawn crackers have to have at least some prawn in them. But it could be that all of this is false, that our brains are just wired up to our senses to make us think that something is real when in fact it's not. We're just imagining it, as if we were in a science fiction film. And when you consider that everything you know could be just a creation of your own mind, then that thought is quite amazing, but don't allow it to go on for more than about 20 seconds, otherwise it will start to drive you mental. Go on, have a go.
Life is but a dream. It's what you make it.
Mark, stop at the edge and tell them he wasn't suggesting this was true, by the way.
He wasn't suggesting this was true, by the way. He was simply trying to find out what could be stated with absolute certainty. So what did that leave? There is just one thing that we can be certain of, he said. Even if everything in our lives is a mirage, I can be certain that I am thinking.
Jump and make it look slightly camp.
I might be thinking things that are wrong, but there can be no doubt that I am having these thoughts. A demon might have created my body, but I am definitely thinking, which is a relief, as it means I must exist.
Quick, get to the catchphrase.
In fact, I think, therefore I am.
Now get out of there.
The glory of all this was the praise of doubt. When someone keeps telling you something, it's really hard to stay doubting, even if it's rubbish. So you watch these infomercials, and after a few minutes you start believing them, and they're going, drinking doesn't have to be a chore. It can be a pleasure with Easy Cup. Drinking has never been easier. And Easy Cup can contain hot and cold liquid and can hold as much as a cupful. Now, Descartes was aware that for the purposes of everyday life, he had to accept that things were true. But he laid out a theory that nothing should be accepted unless subject to scrutiny. Now, laws, governments, the Bible were open to question as never before. But Descartes' problem with how to fit God into his scheme started before anyone had the chance to go berserk with him. It started with his own mind. It terrified him that there was no proof for God. Descartes had set out in part to provide the church with a system of thought that could incorporate the new science, but now he'd gone much further and he panicked. So he wrote that his refusal to believe anything unless there was definite proof
in no way discredits the miracle of creation.
Sacré bleu, c'est vrai.
So desperately, Descartes tried to fix God back into his system. And he came up with this theory. Everything that exists, he said, must have been created by something that was stronger than the thing itself. For example, the heat of a cake can't possibly be greater than the heat of the oven that produced it. Except that humans do have an idea of God, who is perfect. So, he said, the only way that humans can contemplate a God who is more perfect than us is if God put that thought in our minds in the first place. Now, there is an obvious flaw here, which is that if we can't come up with anything more perfect than ourselves, how do we create superheroes? If Descartes was right, then comics would have to be full of stories like The Amazing Ordinary Man. He's only slightly less competent than the bloke who draws him. Descartes went on to say that God is, by definition, perfect. And if he's perfect, then he must exist because existence is one of the qualities of perfection. If you don't exist, then you're not perfect. And if that's not weird enough, he went on to say that if God exists, then any ideas we have that are clear and distinct must be a guide to truth, because God wouldn't allow us to have clear and distinct ideas that are rubbish. Now, he said, have a clear and distinct idea that God exists. And if God exists, then any ideas we have that are clear and distinct must be a guide to truth. Because God wouldn't allow us to have clear and distinct ideas that are rubbish. Now, he said, I have a clear and distinct idea that God exists. Now, if God exists, then any ideas we have that are clear and distinct must be a guide to truth. The trouble with this is it goes round and round and round in circles, and this never-ending logic became known as the Cartesian circle. But also, if God created the idea of God in our minds, then that allows for some sort of connection between God's knowledge and our knowledge, and the church was appalled at any suggestion there could be a similarity between the two, because we're supposed to be lowly. That's why there's a prayer that actually starts, "O Lord, we are not worthy to receive you." There's probably another one that starts, "O Lord, how do you put up with arseholes like us? Because scum's too good a word for us, O Lord, we're filth. No, worse than that, Almighty Lord, we're sewage. That's right, we've got it this time, Lord, sewage." You're not supposed to believe in God because you've worked out how he makes us believe in him. You're supposed to believe in him through faith. Faith is what the church demanded, not proof. Descartes then turned his attention to the anatomy. To begin with, he dissected animals, asking his readers,
I would like those not versed in anatomy, before reading this, to cut open in front of them the heart of some large animal which has lungs.
He moved to a new house in Amsterdam because it was situated next to a butcher's where he could get a fresh supply of organs. And he teamed up with a new colleague, Fortunatus Vopsicus, and together they'd merrily dissect away. Fortunatus wrote,
"We went almost every day to the butcher to see him kill the animals and to have carried to our lodgings the parts that we wanted to anatomize at our leisure."
These experiments led to a complete change in the direction of biology, as before Descartes there had been no coherent theory as to how the senses worked. Medieval biologists believed that the ears worked because God had granted them hearing qualities, the eyes had been granted seeing qualities, and so on. As long as this belief was held, it was impossible to fathom the mechanics of the eye or the ear. But then Descartes worked out that the senses operate through the nervous system. When you see, it's because the optical nerve has responded to light, and then energy rushes through the nerves to the brain. Your nerves respond instinctively when you come into contact with intense heat, such as touching an iron or climbing into an oven. The problem comes with working out how the brain tells your arm to move up and down as you please. Is it a mechanical thing, so that you're physically sent a signal from the brain to the arm to move? But it's not like that, he said, because we're not machines like animals. We make decisions based on reason. Shall I have a strawberry milkshake or a mango milkshake? Shall I go and see a Ben Elton musical, or shall I set myself on fire? These are decisions that we make every day. But we don't always make the same decisions. The reason he decided is that our minds are separate from our brains. In other words, we're made up of two parts, our body and our thoughts. After all, he'd said that the only proof that we're here at all is that we are thinking. There's no evidence that our bodies exist at all. And this theory that we're made of two parts, a body and a soul that contains our thoughts, became known as dualism. And there's an attempt to turn humans into robots. For example, you get air stewardesses have to stand there as you're getting off going, "Thank you for flying with us, we hope you enjoy your stay. Thank you for flying with us, we hope you enjoy your stay. Thank you for flying with us, we hope you enjoy your stay." But this isn't friendly because it's from a machine, not a soul. It'd be friendlier if they were human and stood there going, "Bet you shat yourself in the turbulence." But when somebody defies the predictability and appeals to our soul, we love it. No machine, said Descartes, could possibly be designed that could emulate the human mind. He said,
"One can even conceive that a machine could be so made as to emit words. It may even arrange words, in the way that the most unintelligent of men do."
This was a fantastic prediction, as we've only recently got these speaking machines, but they're nowhere near human because they're incapable of reason, which is why you get these despicable telephone voices that say, "Please remember your call is important to us." But if they were anywhere near human, they would at least add a little bit of sarcasm and go, "That's why we're going to keep you waiting for another 40 minutes and pump you full of Celine Dion and Craig Bloody David, rang on a Monday, put through on a Wednesday." And when you do eventually get through, there'll be this mass of questions about credit card validity numbers and postcodes and sudden instructions to press star, and you'll just be thinking, please don't cut me off so I have to start all over again. And eventually there will be a question that you cannot answer, like, if your query was a colour, press 1 if it would be yellow, or 2 if it would be turquoise. I wanted a cinema ticket.
Come here. Steal my...
To complete his case for dualism, Descartes had to work out how the mind and the body becomes connected. How does the mind tell the body what to do? Unable to answer his own query, he decided the job must be done by an area in the brain called the pineal gland. This teardrop-shaped gland, he said, processed the demands from the mind and turned them into physical actions, although he had no proof of this whatsoever.
The best philosophers understand that if you want to use your hand, use the pineal gland.
After the publication of his theories, the church was angrier with Descartes than ever. His works were banned from being taught in France. A philosopher, André, insisted on teaching Descartes and was imprisoned in the Bastille. And then leaders of the Protestant church joined in. One rector, Vertius, denounced him, saying,
"Cette philosophie est dangereuse, susceptible de détruire le notre croyant au sujet de l'âme raisonnable, du péché original, des miracles, et de la vraie possession des démons."
Salvation came from Queen Christina of Sweden, who was apparently a big fan of philosophy and particularly of Descartes. So she offered him a job and Descartes took it. But then he went to Stockholm and she told him that she could only be taught philosophy at 5 o'clock in the morning. However, in February 1649 at 5 o'clock one morning, Descartes delivered some papers to the Queen and then went to bed with a chill. He stayed there for 2 days. It turned out he had a brain fever and refused to be bled. The court physician was a Dutchman that Descartes couldn't stand, who said,
"If Descartes must die, he'll die more contentedly if he doesn't see me."
And at the age of 53, he died. In the years following his death, he was accepted as having provided a philosophy that could embrace the new science that would dominate thinking. Doubts became a starting point for innovators in every field. And eventually Descartes was taught in the French universities, partly because others that followed on from him, such as Locke and Spinoza, had taken his ideas to even more radical conclusions. And then the town of La Haye, where he was born, changed its name to Descartes. So his job was done, except that now we're in danger of reverting back to the twaddle that he tried to get rid of. In 1800, the presidential election in America was fought between candidates who argued about who was best placed to make use of science and technology in the new age of reason. Now, presidential elections are fought between candidates who argue about who spent the most time praying. And everywhere you go, there's people devoting themselves to crystals and Kabbalah and Feng Shui, charging people a fortune to go around their house and go, and this bit up here is what I call the ceiling area. Then there's these loonies who reckon that they can cure your diarrhoea by waving their hands around your head to realign your aura and say you'll never get earache if you wear the colour magenta and go, well, I've been reading about the Maguini tribe in the hills of the Ukraine. Do you know they live to be 370 years old and none of them have ever eaten a thing? Descartes was a huge step in the quest for reason, for working out why a stone falls or medicine heals, and not assuming that it's down to God's will or positive auras or Saturn rising behind Venus. But he was also the first to base a philosophy around subjecting every idea to scrutiny, which is still hard today, when enough people in authority tell you that a dictator is planning to invade us or that a madman on the underground had to be shot because he jumped over a barrier. It's very difficult to say, I'm not going to believe that until I've seen the evidence. If Descartes was around today, I think that the first thing he would say would be, look, if you're convinced that you shouldn't get up before midday and somebody tries to persuade you to do otherwise, then don't. Because as long as you've got your health, that's the main thing.
I know this feeling, I know it from before. Descartes through Hegel, belief is never sure. Time store mystery, last temptation.
And if you'd like to know more about the nature of Descartes' existence, then log on to open2.net.